Now, some of those are recent unmanned, thank God. Some of the early stuff, I remember as a kid in Illinois watching some of that. It was, I mean, that was the time. And then for the president to come out and say, here's what we're going to do. Yeah, we're still working on that, and here's where we're going to go to the moon. I mean, that brings it all in perspective, doesn't it? And they said it was easy. It's always challenging. It's always risky. Challenges were many led directly to the moon with every action taken. Every step was important. Apollo 9 out here in our rotunda. You don't get to the moon without that mission because that was the first time you had the command module and the lunar lander coming together. They had the rendezvous. Buzz certainly knows about that. Rendezvous, Dr. Rendezvous over there. But if that didn't happen, every step had to work. So as we move to this next phase tonight, watch this video right here as we talk about moving on to that first landing on the moon.
Sees a challenge, human beings can accept a challenge and chart a course and do just remarkable things. Given a task to do, one that seems impossible, given the desire to do it, humans can accomplish almost anything.
We had another part of the video there, but that's okay. Moving on. Let's invite our next panel to the stage here right now. We can. You know him, you love him. Again, legends. Walter Cunningham. Buzz Aldrin. Al Worden. And Charlie Duke. Buzz and Al are checking out their jewelry. I keep thinking that Buzz has so much hardware on. I always think he's going to open up a little kiosk out here just because it's all significant. It's all tremendous. Yeah, so you're going to go home tonight. People say, well, what'd you do last night? So we just kind of sat out in the living room. 450 people in Living Legends of Space. Little thing we actually do here often at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. By the way, also joining us tonight in the audience is Bob Cuervo. Bob is a Navy veteran. He worked in the manned space program as an inspector and quality engineer. His dedicated service spanned the entire Apollo program from the early days of Apollo 1 up through Apollo 17. Bob, where are you? Right over here. Meet our next dating game panel here, shall we? Walter Cunningham. Walt Cunningham was selected by NASA in 1963. He flew on the crucial Apollo 7 mission in 1968, the first manned Apollo flight. following that tragic fire and the loss of the Apollo 1 crew. Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chapman. Significant spacecraft redesigns of the crews and Cunningham's skills singularly restored confidence in the Apollo program, ensuring further missions and the first landing on the moon less than a year later. Walt proved himself a superb pilot, a creative engineer, and he teamed in the preliminary design work of the Skylab space station before leaving NASA in 1971. He's the author of the highly acclaimed astronaut memoir, The All-American Boys. That will be Walt Cunningham, right over here. Charlie Duke, also known as General Duke, also known as Charles Moss Duke Jr. That's enough. He is the youngest man to walk on the moon. See, this is where I just got to tell you this. The little kid in me, okay, the seasoned broadcast professional, inside of me is this 5-year-old kid from the Midwest going, holy crap, you know these guys. And I never get tired of it. We've been in more situations. Sermon and I spent time up at the Schultz Museum up in Santa Rosa for the anniversary of Apollo 10, sharing a room on futon beds meant for Jeannie Schultz's grandkids. I mean, bonding with these guys, it's like, how does this happen? And here we are on a couch with 450 people. So Charlie Duke, youngest man to walk on the moon, 10th moonwalker. How many moonwalkers were there, class? 12. I heard a couple people there, right? His Apollo 16 mission was America's 5th manned lunar landing, next to last, first to land in the desolate lunar highlands. Using a lunar rover, Charlie Duke spent 3 days exploring the region, making geological discoveries, which completely revised scientific thinking about the highlands. 3 years earlier, there he was as Capcom. You hear him in that great moment. And he's the guy, mission control, Capcom, where the astronauts had the first hand back and forth with the astronauts. You hear his voice saying things like, Neil, you got a bunch of guys about to turn blue down here, right, Charlie? Something like that. It's amazing stuff because they're always backing up other teams, and then they'd be there as Capcom. You hear all these voices. The more you get into it, it's so fascinating. And of course, his expertise and his voice was all part of getting that landing with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin going down to Tranquility Base. Charlie Duke, right over there. His life's work to heckle Larson at every event. It's really good. As command module pilot for Apollo 15, Al led the first extended scientific exploration of the moon. He spent 6 days orbiting our neighbor in space, 3 days completely alone. Think about that, the most isolated human in existence. During the mission's return to Earth, he also conducted the first spacewalk in deep space. And Al, how many miles away from Earth was that? 220?
Oh, I guess a couple 100,000.
Just a couple 100,000. When Al goes out and he just takes a walk, he does it 200-some thousand miles away from Earth. Unbelievable. He became the first man to see both the entire Earth and the moon simply by turning his head. That's a true story. The Apollo 15 flight capped an already impressive career for Worden as an astronaut, including important work pioneering the Apollo 9 and Apollo 12 missions, as well as the perilous flight of Apollo 13. His memoir, Falling to Earth, which happens to be co-authored with our education director, Francis French, whose lovely late Jennifer's wife looks just marvelous tonight. Now, Francis owes me money for saying that. But that's a national bestseller. It's a great book. And, of course, the legendary Buzz Aldrin here with us tonight as well. I wanted you to wait there, but I didn't want you to overexert yourself before the evening was over. Save your energy for the questions. Buzz Aldrin, lunar module pilot for Apollo 11, the first landing, of course, coming up in the anniversary next month. There it was, July 1969. Everybody watched it on television. Pretty much all of us who were alive then remember where we were at that exact moment. You can picture it. Watched by millions and millions around the world. They spent over 2 hours working on the lunar surface. Aldrin's first space flight on Gemini 12 was an opportunity to perform a spacewalk involving many of the issues which had plagued previous missions. Again, crucial, allowed NASA to move into the Apollo era with confidence. His piloting skills, legendary, apparent during his entire career. Buzz is credited with developing key rendezvous techniques used by future astronauts in every facet of spaceflight. You got to remember, the Russians weren't exactly sending us memos saying, here's what we learned, thought we'd share this with you. So we had to learn the hard way. They did too, at times. Buzz is a strong advocate for space exploration even today, working on a lot of projects out of Florida, and a strong supporter of manned missions to Mars. Buzz Aldrin, right over here. And Buzz also wins the award for the most colorful patriotic socks. Just noticed that right now. Is there anything I missed in there? I don't think so. Walter, after the fire, I'm thinking about, Apollo 7, and it frustrates me when we see, documentaries and so forth. It'll usually be something like this. Well, there was the fire, and then there's Apollo 7, and then we went to the moon on Apollo 8. Apollo 7 was so crucial. You, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, I know you worked like 24/7 to make sure, you couldn't screw up. We had to build from that. So after losing 3 of America's heroes, your buddies, you all knew them, you're all together. Describe those days and those nearly 2 years after. How important was that? Talk about the mission and how that all gelled.
Well, I assume this is live. A couple things are
We're making sure Buzz is a mic here. Charlie's also looking for some spare change in the pillars over there. Okay, go ahead.
These guys are really sharp. Actually, I'm a bit unique. I'm the only one up here that hasn't been to the moon.
Well, they wouldn't have gone to the moon if Apollo 7 didn't work right.
Well, let me put a little bit of perspective there. First, I'd like to thank the panel you had here before, because it's so nice to hear a candid perspective, because we've all got a mutual respect, but we don't always know what's going on in the other people's minds a lot of times. So I thought that was really very nice. Thank you, guys. When it came to Apollo 7, the public today doesn't understand much about the history. And what had really happened when we finally flew on Apollo 7 had been at the end of almost 3 years of training to get ready to do that. For example, there was Apollo 1 and there was Apollo 2. We were on the Apollo 2 spacecraft. It's Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and I. We were living at the contractors because the spacecraft wasn't built. We used to have to test it. When it installed apart, Frank Borman and I would be sleeping upstairs and come down just to get in, get a little time and get familiar with the equipment. And there's a difference that went on in management. I'll point this out for the people we just had from the flight directors, the operations there. A lot of things that we were trying to get done to the spacecraft to fix it up. What would have been Gus Griswold's first mission, and we had a similar spacecraft, the second one. A lot of that was getting turned down and rejected because Rockwell was just then getting started into the spacecraft business. And it was a fight to get the changes made. They built a lot of test planes, very experienced. And also, as the crews started going out there, we had things that we wanted to get fixed that were operationally desirable. Some of them we thought were absolutely necessary. But a lot of that stuff was getting put off because of the delay. We were in a race to beat the Russians, and it wasn't just to the moon, that was the proof of it. Because the Russians started out ahead of us in 1961. My personal opinion is by the time Gemini was through in 1963, by that time we had gone ahead and exceeded what the Russians were doing. And now we were out to beat them to the moon, and there was a lot of pressure on to do that. So they canceled Apollo 2. They canceled Apollo 2. We became the backup crew on Apollo 1. 3 or 4 months later, as you know, they had the fire. And it was a fire that you couldn't pin down precisely the source, but it was from things that we knew had been going on inside that spacecraft, were not getting fixed, We didn't have the leverage to do it. And so it started, all of a sudden, we had to get things going right. 3 weeks later, our crew was then made the prime crew on the first Apollo mission, which eventually was called Apollo 7. But because of that particular accident, it was critical in what was now being decided on, and only 21 months later, which was amazing, we had made, I think, 1,040 different changes to that spacecraft. Anything that could possibly cause the fire was part of it, but we also had the right hatch on, which was not invented after the Apollo 1 fire. That hatch had been under development, but it was decided to put it on the third spacecraft. So a lot of those things went together, and 21 months later, we ended up flying the first test flight, and I have to tell you, the contractors, management, the organization at NASA had done a near perfect job. We even added a couple of objectives to it during the mission, and to this day it's still the longest, most ambitious and most successful first test flight ever. I feel just very fortunate to have been there.
Also the first live television from space too. That was another little thing that was...
Well, I do have an Emmy, but nobody
Yeah, you
else.
got an Emmy. Yeah, you guys all got the Emmy. That's where Sharon would always get me with his gotchas. He said, you have an Emmy, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, yours is regional, mine's national, and it's from space. Buzz, along the way, besides teaming with Neil, the first two men, there you are, walking on the moon, making history.
I had a question for you.
You want to? Oh, you want to go to that? Okay, sure.
Yes, sir.
After the Apollo 1 fire, and it was how many months? 21 months?
21 months.
Okay, now in 2018, we're planning on flying an unmanned Orion, not Apollo.
Right.
And it's going to go around the moon. Everything's fine. And we're going to fly the second mission and put a crew in it. But it's the first time that spacecraft Orion has had a crew in it. And they're going to go to the moon. What do you think about that?
Well, let me answer that, because you know, the space shuttle, the first time it flew, it had a crew on board. That was the first time for that. So I've got confidence in the way things are developed now, especially within NASA. A little bit more curiosity about the so-called commercial space companies.
All right, now Buzz, along the way, besides teaming with Neil as the first two men on the moon, there were critical mission skill sets that both of you had to have for this, again, because you're the first, as you're both there in 69. What do you believe is most important? Did you think about the Apollo 11 mission? Just the skill sets that you and Neil needed, because again, nobody had done it. You trained for it, but...
Well, we were fortunate enough to be on the backup crew for Apollo 8. Other than Walt's first time in the spacecraft, we now put the spacecraft in a greater challenging position because it looked like the Russians just might fly a cosmonaut around the moon and back. They'd flown twice with dummies and landed. And it was because of that that they took this spacecraft. The lander was not ready, so that crew got postponed, and the crew moved ahead now to fly the second flight. And the decision was made. First time they'd be on a big Saturn V rocket. Second time, and we sent them to the moon on Apollo 8. That was a very big deal. I think that an even bigger deal was before the end of 1962. The way to get to the moon, a la Dr. Werner von Braun, was with a very big spacecraft that would have taken not the Saturn V, but a Nova rocket, not 5 engines, but 9. It wouldn't be ready in time. So 2 Saturn Vs would be needed to put up a big propulsion system, and then the crew spacecraft would join an Earth orbit rendezvous. Then they would go, and that spacecraft would do everything. That is not what we did. John Hubble, an engineer from Langley, a lot more innovation with spacecraft and trade-offs than His Highness, the Rocket Man, Dr. von Braun. He said, now, if you want to put a man on the moon, let's look at the steps you need to get there. They have to launch on a spacecraft that's going to come back, but they need a service module to get them to the moon and to come back. But when you are at the moon, that's not the lander. You need a lander with a descent stage. You can leave it on the moon in the ascent stage. But now the other spacecraft, you have to join up with it at lunar distance. You have to make this complicated lunar orbit rendezvous. And that is the way all Apollo missions flew. The biggest enabling decision of the whole Apollo program was lunar orbit rendezvous. I just want to put in a plug for the future. The biggest activity going back to the moon will be lunar reusable rendezvous.
All right. It's amazing to think back, and amazing is an overused word. Everything's now amazing. Oh, you look amazing. You think about, we were doing Apollo flights like every 2 months there. You look at just how things accelerated from 58 all the way through 69. Al Worden, your mission on Apollo 15 scored, we mentioned many significant breakthroughs and experiments. What do you remember most? What was the scariest moment or moments? I mentioned about the loneliest man anywhere that we knew of, those 3 days in total solitude. Some people kind of chuckle about that because it sounds weird. Every move these guys made were breakthrough moves that were always risky and death-defying. Your spacewalk certainly was. But you think about that. Scariest moment or moments? What comes to mind?
Scariest moment. Well, I guess there were a few here and there.
Other than being on here on this panel right now.
I'm going to tell you about one that was a little scary to me. I dropped Dave and Jim off the lunar module. They went down to land, and I had to go back into a
That would be that's Dave Scott and Jim Murray.
Yeah, Dave Scott and Jim Murray. I had to go into a 60-mile orbit. I was down pretty low, right over the landing site. We were down to probably 5-6 miles over the surface, over the landing site. So I had to get back into a 60-mile orbit. To get them into the lunar module and get everything squared away, we took out the center couch. And what I don't think any of us realized is that the 2 outboard couches were hung on a shock absorber, if you will, and they weren't tied to the side of the spacecraft. It was the center couch had to be in for everything to be fixed in place. So after Dave and Jim got lunar module on our way down, I had to do a thrusting maneuver. I had to accelerate a little bit to go back to 60-mile orbit. What I did not realize is that with that thing on the stabilizer or on the shock absorber accelerating forward, this thing is going to start swinging on me. So the next thing I knew after I got the engine started was that I'm looking out the side window of the spacecraft, not looking at the instrument panel, and I couldn't reach anything. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I hope the computer does the right thing and shuts it off when it's supposed to. And it did. So I was okay. But that was kind of a funny little moment for me.
Well, we're glad it worked out well. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking computers, your iPhone
Digging
has...
deep here, you understand, Mark. We're really telling some secrets.
I know, this is top secret.
Who was watching?
Who was watching? Nobody but me.
All right. And how fast do you go on the way to the moon? People got to get this in their head as they're speeding down here. Now, you maybe what's the speed to the moon? Okay, because I know 17,500 miles an hour around Earth, but what's...
Well, when you leave Earth's orbit, you got to go about 22 or about 25,000 miles
We're
an hour.
25,000 miles an hour.
No. We're a lot slower than that. But you slow down as you go out, and you get to a point where the moon's gravity becomes bigger, greater, and that sucks you into the backside of the moon, at which you hit with a velocity of somewhere around 8,000 miles an hour. To stay in lunar orbit, you have to cut that down to about 5. So we were doing about 5,000 miles an hour, but I had to
Just
add
a day
a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, that's easy. I mean, $5 grand. You know what I say, Mark, what I tell everybody wants to know about going fast. 25,500 miles an hour. Yeah, you're really going fast. But you know what? There's nothing going by the window. You have absolutely no idea
That you can tell
how
us about.
fast you are going because there are no road signs or trees going by the window. So you have to take it on faith that the instruments are telling you the right thing.
Charlie, dude, you're kind of the Mario Andretti of the astronauts. They're driving around. And of course, when you're driving, it's all relative. How fast does the lunar rover go? 17 miles an hour, maybe?
Well, the speedometer was calibrated to maximum on the speedometer.
This is on the moon. You're 1/6 gravity, keep in mind, right?
Yeah, the speedometer only goes up to 17 miles per hour. 17 kilometers per hour.
Okay.
So we were all scale high on our flight and on Apollo 17. So I don't know exactly how fast we were going, but 17 kilometers an hour plus is a bouncy ride across the lunar surface.
Well, you also had the issue that when you landed in lunar module, as lunar module pilot, you're kind of close to this very large crater, as I recall, right there in the neighborhood, and you're kind of on a little bit of an angle. And
We thought we landed perfectly. John had selected a spot, and we were dead level. And we were just hoorahing. We were 6 hours late behind schedule because of some problems we had the command module. But anyway, we were on the surface. And then after a rest period, I got outside and walked around the backside of the lunar module to retrieve the experiments package. And we had missed this big crater by about 2 meters, about 6, 7 feet.
you got to look at these pictures. They're incredible. I mean, you can find them online.
Yeah, and we didn't even see it. And if we'd have landed 6 feet back, the back leg would have been in the crater, and we wouldn't have turned over, but the experiments package would have been outside of my reach. I wouldn't have been able to get them off. So we were very fortunate to have missed that crater.
And then you get into the lunar rover, and you'd speed off, a few kilometers an hour, and describe that a little bit. It wasn't just like hopping on the freeway where you take the lunar rover.
Well, no, I was John Young he was the commander. He drove and I navigated. And you jumped in and you were sitting like this until you buckled your seatbelt, and then you sort of pulled yourself up. And so with a set of maps, I was telling John which way to go, and we were bouncing across the moon. The moon's rough, at least our landing site was, and it was a really bumpy ride. You never felt like it was going to roll over, but it was real squirrely, and the back end kept breaking loose, and so I had a great job just looking out and describing everything, and this crater, that crater, and John was looking right at the road, wasn't a road, but at the surface in front of us. Yeah, by the way, as everybody knows, there's no roads on the moon, but there's no traffic either.
Did Cernan have the only fender bender on the moon? Because on 17, he did something with a fender, right? And he used duct tape. True story.
We had one come off also, and on our flight, I think it was second EVA, the right rear fender came off. I think due to a snag on my spacesuit, I caught the fender and it came off. And we didn't worry about it, but it turned out it was raining moon dust down on top of us, and it got very irritating. And so when the same thing happened to Apollo 17, we jury-rigged a piece of checklist to the fender to make a new fender to keep the dust off them.
Al, did you have a rebuttal? I think a rebuttal from Buzz here too.
Can I ask a question?
I'll raise his hand first and go to Buzz.
But, okay, I would like to have Charlie explain the problem with potassium.
Charlie, would you please explain the problem with potassium?
I'd be happy to. The Apollo 15, it's hard work on the moon. They were there for 72 hours almost, and so 3 EVAs, and working in that spacesuit's tough. And so I believe it was Jim Irwin they noticed some heart irregularities. And so when he got back, the doctors were concerned, and so they said, well, we think the problem was they were low in potassium. Well, here's what we'll do. We will put potassium in all of your food, and so you won't have any heart irregularities due to low potassium. And so that's what they did. Every drink we had, every food we had this potassium. And we didn't have any heart problems, but it acted like a laxative.
That's right. The magic
And in Apollo, the waste management system was not a triumph of technology.
I mean, it took us an hour to get to the first, everyday bodily functions thing. The most popular question these guys get answered, it gets asked across the...
Excuse me, how do you do it? How do you go to the bathroom in space?
This is a much more creative way to start dealing with the
Anyway,
number 1 and number 2 issues that come up.
One more comment and I'll quit.
Potassium.
On our flight, we almost ran out of bags. And that would have been a real serious problem to run out of waste management bags.
So now you know, when you think of those splashdowns, and they'd go there and you'd see the carriers and the choppers coming in, and then they got the floater rings around the spacecraft, and then they open it up. It just smells like victory.
Charlie didn't really focus on the gas.
There's more.
Potassium promotes gas.
This is science.
And there's a whole downlink that was published in Aviation Week after their flight.
Is this in your
about
book?
what was said on board when they were relieving themselves of the gas that they had. I think it was kind of smelly in there.
And I read your book twice.
I think John Young must be snake bit because on the Gemini flight, the fuel cells, of course, put a lot of gas into the water, and they were doing some experiment with the orange drink And
Yeah.
Tang, yeah. And
Like the astronauts drink. but
Tang was producing quite a bit of gas.
Gave a new meaning to the word tank.
Well, it turned out on our flight, we were orbiting the moon.
I just want you to know, they're really getting excited about this part of the program. We're talking about life and death and mission control. Potassium opens the doors.
Mark, we are talking about the important thing.
Yes, thank you, Al.
We will never get to Mars at this rate.
Why not tell them that we had oxygen masks on board that we put on from time to time?
Yes. Well, Walt, since you have your microphone, and I don't know where else we can go with the
We could really get in the gutter if you want to
We
continue on
could,
that
yeah.
theme. Right.
There are new revelations that...
We're talking about dumps.
No, we don't want to talk about talking document dumps, of course. Now, as we asked our mission controllers, Walt, as I try to regain the programmer, describe the relationships between the astronauts, just like we asked them, the astronauts and those on the ground, because again, you got very strong personalities. You certainly had very strong personalities. Your crew with Wally and Don Isley, and you know, when you all got the head colds came into play as well, there were a lot of challenges there. But any special moments that come to mind? Some of the personality dramas up there, down here?
The simplest answer would be to read my book, The All-American Boys.
That's the first shameless plug of the evening.
But I'd like to first put in perspective, we're talking about the lunar missions. I don't think most of the public understands that plan from the beginning ran almost perfectly the way it was laid out to get to the moon and to fly those particular missions. It's what I call 5 giant steps to the moon. And of course, Apollo 7 was to test the command module. Apollo 8, as it flew, was not even part of the plan at the time this was laid out, of the general mission planning. But when it was looking so good on our recovery from the fire that, probably, I think about 6 weeks or so before our mission, they planned a mission around the moon and into a lunar orbit for Apollo 8 if we had a good mission, which we did. And then they approved it and it went on. So that's the second step. The third step was to test the lunar module. And that was the reason people don't talk about that much today, because it never went to the moon. It was in Earth orbit. I happen to believe it was one of the riskiest missions for the crew that we had, because they spent a day in the lunar module, no heat shield, no way of re-entering unless they were able to rendezvous and dock and get back into the command module. Then we had Apollo 10. Apollo 10 was a complete rehearsal right down to about 50,000 feet for the whole lunar landing mission. And then Apollo 11, everybody knows because you actually made it. But I don't think I ever told you this, but I remember telling Neil one time, I says, you know, the only thing you did that hadn't been done before, Neil, was that last 50,000 feet. But
Yeah, we could have parachuted down from that.
yeah, you could. Yeah. Now, what was your question for me?
Well, I'm just still thinking it's potassium here. No, just about the personalities.
Personalities?
You know, between mission control,
Okay.
the astronauts, all the various dynamic, strong.
I think Apollo 7 is fairly notorious for that. I personally believe it's never been terribly objective from the beginning, but it was operated because Wally Schirra, who's been out here for many, many years, he was a good friend.
Museum board.
Yeah, a good friend of mine. He is in charge. He was the commander of our mission, and Wally had a cold. And I might tell you how that cold came up. You must.
You might remember those Active Head commercials too.
Oh, well, that was afterwards,
That was
yes.
afterward, yes.
And that's why I didn't do one of those
How did the
Active
cold
Head
come up?
commercials, because I
Don't
never
say
had a cold.
it wasn't potassium.
I'll tell you how that cold came up. I think we launched on a Thursday. The weekend before, we all went hunting down there at the Cape. And we went hunting down there at the Cape. And it was was cold and it was wet. And that was on Sunday evening. Went back. Don Isley and I thought that we might be able to get a cold. So we went and got a cold shot back in those days. Mentioned it to Wally. Wally didn't want to get a cold shot, so he never got a cold shot. And actually, when we got into orbit, come to think of it, I've never reported that cold shot to anybody until just now.
A lot of revelations tonight. Historic.
But Wally caught a cold, and if you knew Wally, if Wally had caught a cold, he said everybody had a cold. And I remember that did create a few problems on board. For example, I can remember when Wally started blowing his nose. We had some Kleenex on board, not a hell of a lot of them. And after a little while, Don and I told Wally, he says, Wally, you've got to do more than just blow your nose once and throw the Kleenex away. And I never thought much about it since. It bothered him a little bit, and he started doing it. Now, every time I blow my nose with a Kleenex, and I realize how hard it is to have used it more than once, I think about that.
For a moment, I thought you were going to say, the way we've been going the last few minutes, every time you blow your nose, an angel gets his wings. Just for a moment, I thought about that.
So there was a little bit of irritation on board, but there was a fair amount of irritation between the air and the ground, and I personally believe it's because Wally had already announced he was going to be leaving. He knew he was going to be leaving.
Well, there was the issue of, because of the cold, on re-entry and the helmets, right? Putting the helmets on.
Well, I have to tell you, the reason that was a problem on 7 was because the couches weren't really structured right for being without a helmet. But Wally wanted to make sure he could clear his nose if needed. We all believed in it. We supported him doing that. And I don't think that they ever wore a helmet on re-entry any time after that. So that was one of the protective things he did.
Say, you remember on 76, he had to come down right after the rendezvous
Yes.
to get a cigarette.
That's right, he did. That's right. 76 and 7, that was the rendezvous.
No, he wasn't smoking.
Oh, no, wink, wink. No, he wasn't
I have
smoking
to
at
tell you
all.
something else. We had to fight like hell to get one coffee a day. Because, yes, they finally agreed to let us have one coffee a day. But they also wouldn't let the water be above, I think it was 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And it took about 5 minutes after you put that 135-degree Fahrenheit water in the bag, mix up the coffee. By the time you finally got to have that one cup of coffee a day, it was down to maybe 100 to 105 degrees. It was beautiful.
Okay, real quick here, because we're down to the final stretch, and then we'll kind of have a full group medley here with a few lightning round kind of questions here. But Buzz, when you think back on your space career with NASA in those pioneering days, Gemini and Apollo specifically, what'd you like best? What didn't you like? Just, you think about it. I love this, didn't like that so much.
I didn't like the fact that they canceled the maneuvering unit on Gemini 12.
That was the one that CERN was going to try on 9, Gemini 9?
Yeah.
Which is the Buck Rogers kind of thing without the...
Then it was going to fly again.
Yeah.
But we continued to not have great success in spacewalking. Dick Gordon, Mike Collins, pretty good. Going over to another craft. But then I was training underwater, neutral buoyancy. And I felt that equipped the training to be able to overcome any problems we might have had. And I was very confident. But it was a decision to avoid another not quite so successful spacewalk on the last flight.
So you learned a lot about the footings and...
Well, just recently I got so jealous of George Clooney messing
the fence and shy and withdrawn, any of that. A lot of experiments again on 15 were really important, and please do not go to the potassium in this one. But what gave us the most information, as you see it? Were there experiments or proof of concepts that we should have done more of on the mission? Because you're blazing some new trails, and they're often unsung, as many of these missions were as time goes by.
Well, I think there were a lot of them. I don't think we've even scratched the surface on the kinds of experiments in science that needs to be done, not just on the moon, but a lot of other places too. The next step is going to Mars, and we're going to have to do a lot of stuff there too. I think to me, the most important thing about orbiting the moon and being in a location in orbit around the moon where I was shadowed from both the sun and the earth, which was an area of complete blackness. What really blew my mind was what the universe looked like out there. And you begin to understand a little bit more about what it is. I mean, we're in, as an example, a galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy has some 200 to 400 billion stars in it. And there are a couple 100 billion other galaxies out there. And you begin to realize that, hey, this is a whole different thing than I ever thought it was, that I grew up believing. And going forward, we're going to have to be a little more conscious of what the universe is all about. And that's the kind of thing that I think going back to the moon, a real advantage, if we could do it, going back to the moon, would be putting the biggest telescope you could think of on the backside of the moon.
Yeah.
Because there's no atmosphere, you'd have perfect viewing, you'd be in complete darkness 14 days out of the month. Be a perfect place to do that. And I think that would be a great thing for us to do.
All right. And Charlie Duke, thank you. I was thinking about how a lot of made Chuck Yeager's kind of drawl that the pilots pick up. You could be on a passenger plane, and if you got a problem, the pilot always comes out. Now, folks, you notice we've lost a wing, but it's going to be fine. Yeah, Charlie, you got that kind of cool thing working. You were doing that. But I mean, when you Capcom and Apollo 11, always got that nice, pleasant, North Carolina, thing working for you. That helps between mission control and what's going on in space. When you think about that, mission control guys, and those experiences of teaming, what comes to mind? Is it that great moment on Apollo 11, or is there other, when you think about mission control and your experiences there with guys like our mission control team here tonight?
Well, I had a great privilege of seeing it from both sides, a mission from both sides, and had been Capcom on Apollo 10 for the simulated descent and rendezvous, and then doing the same thing on Apollo 11 was a tremendous.
He did such a great job with Apollo 10 that everyone on our crew specifically wanted this guy.
Nice.
And
It's that Southern
matter of fact,
It's that Georgia drawl that did it.
a little known piece of trivia. Before that mission, Apollo 11 left, there were 4 people that knew something that nobody else knew. Right?
Right, and that was? What was it they knew, Buzz?
I'll let Buzz, you want to explain, Buzz?
I'm not sure I can pronounce Tranquility Base.
Yeah.
We as a crew decided we were going to land, and from that point on, we were not Eagle, we were Tranquility Base. But we picked this guy because he did such a good job as Capcom on Apollo 10.
Right.
So we had to clue him in on this secret so he would make sure not to bubble it up when Neil said, Houston Tranquility Base, the Eagle has landed. Right?
And I still messed it up. so excited. We pulled it off, you know, almost out of gas. I called 30 seconds to abort, and a few seconds later, Buzz said, "Contact, engine stop." And I knew they were on the ground, and there was a pause, and then Neil came back and said, "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." And I said, "Roger Twang, Tranquility." We copy you on the ground. And we were really about to, it was the quietest I'd ever seen it, Mission Control. And I was there for 10, 11, back up 13, back up 17. And there was a lot of decisions made in those missions that were could have been life-threatening if it wasn't made the right decision. But as the flight directors mentioned, the simulations were so good, and they put us through so many different kind of situations that I had confidence in, as a flight member, that whatever problem we had, those guys were going to fix it. And I still think today the unsung heroes of Apollo were the mission control team. They
Think about the cloud, just a few seconds of that, when you said about out of gas, Neil's looking for you, they're looking at rocks down there, and he just knew exactly what he's doing, and he and Buzz, it's coolness under pressure, and just to the right spot. He couldn't just land anywhere. And walk real quick, and we'll bring it up.
He made a reference to a point that we really need to be made around here. We were sitting probably at the top of that needle and received notoriety. But I have to tell you, you saw flight directors up here just a short few minutes ago. The real success of what went on back in those days was dependent on maybe not all 400,000 people that were involved, but it was management, it was the engineering, it was the training. Those people, believe me, were the key to success that we had on Apollo. We just enjoyed the victory of that.
There's another uniqueness in people who are unsung heroes. In 1967, the first landing lunar module that was light enough in weight was LEM 6. Neil and I were on LEM 5. In 67, it was too heavy and was not going to be a landing spacecraft. Now the manager, an Air Force guy, wanted his lander to land on the moon. He thought he could trim a little here, get something out of the Saturn reserve tabulations, and he went to George Lowe, Apollo program manager. He said, "George, if I can get the weight down, will you assure that LEM 5 will make a landing?" And George says, "Well, of course, we'd like another earlier attempt, a couple months earlier." That is why, when you said 60 seconds, we were 100 feet. Okay, I was getting a little nervous. I didn't know Hugh Davis at the time. He was the manager of LEM 5. It was a little heavy, but it was clear. But at 30 seconds, 10 feet, and you mentioned you were going to give us an abort call. there's no way we were gonna abort.
Well, I didn't see you were going to